My name is Alison Every and I am the InterScience Program Director. We are thrilled to have astrophysicist and Australian Women in STEM Ambassador, Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith, sharing her thoughts on this important topic. This will be followed by a brief panel discussion to be moderated by InterScience Advisory Board Chairman, La Trobe University Chancellor and former Victorian Premier, the Hon John Brumby. We'll then leave half an hour at the end of the event for questions from the audience. Now, it's my great pleasure to welcome InterScience e-mentor Stephanie Walker. She's a Bachelor of Science student at the University of Melbourne for the acknowledgement of country. Thanks, Stephanie.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Walker, and I'm a proud Kuku Yalanji, Jirame, and Yorta Yorta woman. I understand that we are most likely situated across different parts of Australia right now, so I would like to acknowledge and pay respects to the land which I am currently on. I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the land of the Yorta Yorta people. I also acknowledge Aboriginal people as the traditional owners of this land. I pay respect to my elders, those who have passed, those who are currently leading, and those who are emerging, the future caretakers of this sacred land. This land was and always will be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Stephanie. InterScience is extremely proud to be co-hosting this event with Engineers Australia. InterScience is a peer mentoring program that engages high school students in science and maths for building relationships with university student mentors. Our outstanding mentors, like Stephanie, are drawn from our InterScience partner universities, La Trobe University, the University of Melbourne, RMIT University, Swinburne University of Technology, and Monash University. And they love to share their passion for science and maths with students who, in many cases, have never envisaged a career in STEM as being a viable option for themselves. The COVID-19 pandemic has not left a single member of the community untouched. Teachers' unwavering commitment to meet their students' needs has been exceedingly apparent. However, teachers have been unable to access many STEM engagement experiences that help spark students' enthusiasm for science and maths. We bring you tonight's event aiming to find novel and innovative ways to engage students in the current environment, and we are calling on the higher education sector and STEM industry to support this effort. One outstanding example of STEM industry's commitment to supporting the future STEM workforce is the CMP GEMS in STEM program. We're generously supporting this event. I would particularly like to thank Soyan Punyadasa, Director at CMP Consulting Group, who has asked me to convey this message. CMP GEMS in STEM is a program that aims to inspire senior secondary students into a career in STEM. We at GEMS in STEM really admire and support the work carried out by InterScience. The fact that InterScience has allowed mentoring of almost 70,000 students from 2004 to 2020 is both inspiring and creates hope. Hope that through these amazing programs, our young people will be more confident and believe that they can and will be the future leaders of our profession. We are so honoured to sponsor today's event. Thank you. Thank you, Soyan. It is now my great pleasure to ask Dr. Bronwyn Evans, CEO of Engineers Australia, to introduce today's keynote speaker. Thank you, Bronwyn.
Thank you very much, Alison, and it's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon and welcome all of the participants this afternoon. And it is my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce to you our keynote speaker. And what an eminent speaker we have. Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith is the Australian Government's Women in STEM Ambassador and a Professor of Practice at the University of New South Wales. In her role as Women in STEM Ambassador, Lisa is responsible for increasing the participation of women and girls in science, technology, engineering and maths, those STEM studies and careers across Australia. An award-winning astrophysicist with research interests in the birth and death of stars and supermassive black holes. What an awesome field to be investigating. Lisa serves on the Australian Space Agency's advisory group and has previously worked on the Square Kilometre Array, which is, for many of you who will know, it spans multiple continents and it's about the next generation radio telescope that will survey billions of years of cosmic history. Lisa is also a presenter on the ABC TV show Stargazing Live. She's a frequent keynote speaker and a regular science commentator on TV and radio, and has been awarded in 2016 the Eureka Prize for promoting the understanding of Australian science research. Also a published author and performs in theatres. So we're very privileged to have Lisa here tonight. Please welcome Lisa Harvey-Smith as our keynote speaker this afternoon.
Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much, Bronwyn, for that wonderful introduction. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all meeting across Australia today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm really excited to be at this forum. There are so many important issues that we can discuss and some great insights I think we're going to get from the panel later. My role is the Women in STEM Ambassador for the Australian Government. Now, I'm the inaugural Women in STEM Ambassador, and as Bronwyn said, my role is to increase the participation of women and girls in science, technology, engineering and maths. Now, this is so important, and it goes broader than just gender as well. These issues really intersect as these barriers for participation add up through people's lives, from very young people who are subject to the various biases and stereotypes we have about what STEM means and who works in STEM. So it's really about starting young, breaking down these barriers and showing young people the wonderful and diverse careers and the social good and the impact, social health, environmental impact, all of those things that are important and not just focusing on the technical. So I think we can all learn something from each other tonight. If we just look at a couple of stats quickly, this figure from the Women in STEM Decadal Plan, so a 10-year plan for getting us past this point where only 17% of STEM qualified workers in Australia are female. The real problem areas and the real areas where we have a gender segregation in our workforce is in important areas like engineering. So you can see from the plot here, year 12 subject enrolments, 10% of engineer enrolments are women, 19% in computing, 25% in physical sciences, and it gets a bit higher up to maths. And then we have in biology, of course, it flips over and there are more women, young women doing these subjects. So we have this segregation, and we see it more broadly as well. We have it in health and nursing, and we see it in engineering and technical subjects. Some people believe that there are intrinsic differences between the male and female brain, which causes girls to be interested in some things and boys to be interested in another. The only problem with that is it doesn't stand up to scrutiny at all. In fact, it's rubbish, because when we look at other countries, in many countries like India, China, across the Middle East, the vast majority of engineers are female. So it's really a cultural and environmental issue, and we are causing this issue ourselves, so we can get ourselves out of it. A lot of my work as a Women's Ambassador is talking to young people. In my first year in the role, I went to dozens of schools all over the country, did hundreds of engagements, talked to teachers about education, talked to people about approaches and interventions to getting more young people engaged in STEM education. But unfortunately, as we all have been impacted by COVID, my role has been impacted too. So I've had to stop these public engagements and do more things like this online. And actually, do you know what? That's been a good thing in many ways. The lack of travel and the focus on electronic digital communication has brought me to larger audiences, which was quite surprising. So I've pivoted to work online. Now, the work online has been things like Astrophysics Live. I've done 3 Astrophysics Live sessions for young people. We partnered, we streamed online on YouTube. We use Slido, the interactive tool that we're using today to ask questions, and then put these up online afterwards. And, do a normal school visit. I might get a class of 20 or 30 kids. I might get a whole school of a few hundred kids. My first Astrophysics Live YouTube online streamed event got nearly 1,000 young people signed up. So, we can see that without traveling around the country, pumping carbon into the air, we've actually increased participation. And there are also some other considerations that we have here with online events. As we know, people in regional areas of Australia sometimes can't access good broadband connections. Even I've had to run around my house turning everything off so I get a good enough connection for various events. So, this is a significant barrier that we need to consider when we're doing online events. But the other side of that coin is the access for people with disabilities, and that can actually be boosted by events that are not in person. So there are pluses and minuses that we have to consider. But on the whole, we've tried to mitigate that by creating online events that you can watch later. Maybe that people's connections are variable throughout the day, and events that you can actually participate in with subtitles. In my next event, a STEM Careers Q&A that you can see advertised there for Wednesday, the 19th of August. That's for high school students, and we'll have an Auslan interpreter. So we're trying to really improve our offerings to make them as accessible as they can be to people across the country. So what are the barriers to girls' participation in STEM? And this is a figure from the Women in STEM Decadal Plan. And this is a career progression pipeline. And what it shows, it's not the London Underground, it actually shows a young person's career from their education on the left-hand side right across to the more senior career stages and what barriers are presented to girls' participation. I'd just like to focus on the top left little box under primary and secondary schooling on the top left-hand side. And the barriers to girls' progression at, say, primary school, early secondary school, are things like stereotypes, as I mentioned earlier, about, these jobs are for boys, these are for girls, and biases around those things. And as we see in different countries, those biases vary. There's also a lack of role models, and this is an important one. It's often cited, but, we still see in the school curricula, for example, in New South Wales, there is a huge disparity between the number of women quoted in the STEM curriculum against the number of men. The difference is absolutely shocking. And the more we can do to address those factors and to actively, consciously engage girls in STEM education, and in particular the areas that are really growing, where women are going to find employment opportunities in the future, the more we're going to have a vibrant ecosystem in this country and a vibrant economy, and young people who are confident that they can adapt to the changing job market in the future. So we've really got to focus on these expectations, the engagement with STEM education, and these role models and breaking the biases. So there is a strong driver of girls' interest in STEM and disinterest, and that is social impact. Girls, on average, when you do surveys, you do scientific surveys, cite social impact as a stronger driver for being interested or engaged in a school subject. And boys tend to cite that lower down the pecking order. So I think a really great way, and the fantastic way that I've seen on my travels to engage a broader suite of young people in STEM, is to get rid of the rote learning, get rid of the context-less learning, and really create learning experiences that are holistic. Wonderful things like the Core Learning Foundation that I visited in Western Australia. They learn about resources industry through the history and geology of the Earth. They do site visits, they pick up rocks, and they do amazing field trips across WA. They look at the oldest rocks on planet Earth, 4.5 billion years old, and they do wonderful projects based on those amazing things that they find in the field. and they take samples back to their school and analyse them. They make volcanoes, they do all that cool stuff, but they actually make apps as well. So we see those kind of learning experiences where you have a motivator, you have something in your local regional community that motivates young people to see a connection, to see a link to the land where they live or to the community where they live, and then linking that again to the jobs that they might get in the future. And those learning experiences are whole and they are wonderful. The picture I have the top right here is the Australian Square Kilometre Array Pathfinder telescope. I worked on this for many years when I was at the CSIRO. And the local Payawadri community, actually we did a mentoring program with the students in that school for a number of years, and we did some fantastic site visits. Because this telescope is on their country. And before they were shut out, and now they're allowed in to see and take part in and contribute to this project. They named the infrastructure, they named the dishes in the Wadri language. They came to the site and learnt about what we were doing, and it became a partnership, and students got work experience and ended up some, communities getting jobs on the project as well, which was really wonderful. So these kind of learning approaches are important, linking things not just to textbook diagrams of angles and weights and masses and velocities, but actually linking it to real life. And that's how you get everyone engaged in STEM. There are wonderful experiences, even during this COVID pandemic, that you can really enliven classrooms with. Such as visits from STEM professionals. And there's a great resource, a website called stemwomen.org.au. And there are now hundreds of women signed up to this website. You can sign up if you work in STEM. And what it does, it creates an opportunity for schools or for community organisations to access local women who work in STEM in a variety of roles. And maybe you could organise a Skype where they can talk about their career and talk about the types of projects and activities they're involved in and really inspire the young people who you're working with. So that's a great thing to do. The other great resources that I'm aware of are things like the Girls in STEM Toolkit that's run by the government. It's a fantastic resource with quizzes, with a lot of profiles of STEM professionals who are women and talks about their life and their career. It's really a fantastic resource. And the other one is the Careers with STEM magazines, which you can read online. There's a lot of articles, and it's really focused on sort of younger high school students who are thinking about the types of careers that they could have. Do you know what, though? It's really useful too for teachers who may be teaching a concept and thinking, how do I link this to a real job at the end? Because that's the most awful question, isn't it? I'll never use this in the real world. Why am I learning this? It's boring. Well, I tell you what, you've got hundreds of different ideas on this website, so I would really recommend using that. There's also another opportunity, and that is to link with industry. And this is the final point I'll make. Although people in regional areas and remote areas of Australia may not have large local industries to partner with, there are now increasingly virtual work experience programs, and these focus on regional remote areas. One example is the CSIRO's virtual work experience program. You can see online there's a wonderful video with students from areas like Tennant Creek who are doing real work experience, writing code, discovering new things, doing just incredible work. So if you can get involved in one of those online work experience projects, or create your own with local small businesses, and really get young people to see the possibilities with STEM and how their careers could take them somewhere really special. That's all I have time for right now, but if you'd like to get in touch, my office is really, really working hard across lots of different areas, from education to workplace culture, trying to improve the state of Australian STEM. So please do get in touch and follow on socials. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. That was a really great presentation, and I'm sure we all agree that there's some really great ideas and really great resources for teachers out there to engage, particularly girls, in STEM, and just thinking about widening participation more broadly. Thanks, Lisa. That's great. So now I'm really excited that we have some fantastic panellists to join us to continue this discussion today. So I'm now going to hand over to John Brumby, who will introduce our remaining panellists and facilitate this conversation. Thanks, John.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Alison, and thank you, Lisa, too, for a fabulous address. My job today is to introduce today's two other panellists who will be joining Dr. Evans and Professor Harvey-Smith for this evening's panel discussion. Firstly, Corey Tutt. Corey is a proud Kamilaroi man and founder of Deadly Science, an organisation that sends science resources to remote schools across Australia. Corey is the New South Wales Young Australian of the Year for 2020, the 2019 CSIRO Indigenous STEM Champion, and also an ABC Trailblazer. To date, Corey's distributed more than 11,000 books and over 480 telescopes to more than 100 schools in remote communities. It's been an extraordinary achievement. And as a result, these schools have seen a 25% increase in engagement in STEM-related subjects. Recently, Deadly Science has been playing a role in rebuilding schools affected by the devastating bushfires which have ravaged much of the south coast of New South Wales, again by providing books and resources to schools that have been destroyed by fire. Corey particularly wants to ensure that every Australian school has a copy of Bruce Pascoe's book Dark Emu, which is a history of Indigenous science and agriculture, and is to help educate them about the real story of Australia. So a very warm welcome to Corey. Kathryn.
Sorry?
Thanks, Corey. Kathryn Sobey. Kathryn completed a science degree at the University of Melbourne. She completed the Teach for Australia program while working as a science teacher at Melton Secondary College. After the Teach for Australia program, Kath has held numerous leadership positions and has hosted many Into-Science mentors over the years. Kath is generous in her support of her younger colleagues, while mentors have remarked that Kath has taught them what it really means to be patient, adaptable, and to truly care about the needs of each individual student. Kath is now junior school principal at Melton Secondary College, where she continues to foster a nurturing and supportive environment for students, teachers, and the community. So welcome to you, Kath. And by the way, delighted to see that you're a successful graduate from the Teach for Australia program, and I was a great supporter of that. And in fact, it was Victoria, New South Wales, Victoria and the federal government when Julia Gillard was Prime Minister when we signed off with the original Teach for Australia program. And Lisa, thank you so much for that address. I particularly loved the pipeline that you had, I think, and the various barriers along the way to participation. So we might come to that in a little while in the questions. So I'm going to run through some panel questions now, and then as Alison said, we'll make sure that we've got plenty of time for questions that come from the floor. I've got my phone here with Slido, and I'm seeing those come through, so we'll wait for those. Kath, maybe if I can start with you. During the whole COVID-19 pandemic, as a result of the social distancing restrictions, the transition to remote learning, some students haven't had access to as many hands-on STEM experiences as we'd want. So I guess my question to you, just to kick off, what's been the impact for your students as a result of COVID-19, and what are the biggest barriers that have been faced by you as a school?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, initially,
there was a real need to source the technology for our students, and one-to-one programs is a feat that many schools have been working on for many years to develop, and the pandemic really triggered us to be getting those devices into the hands of students very quickly. And I think we all know that different families have experienced really different challenges in managing the pandemic, and education is no exception to that. And we've got students in really different situations where they're sharing devices, or they are managing their workspaces at home so that everyone's got a quiet space to be working. Not all students have the knowledge to be figuring out new technology. I know my poor chemistry class had to learn a new platform that we were using, with me awkwardly instructing them over a disjointed video conference, which wasn't super ideal. And I think the social connection that's been compromised for many of our young people is really quite significant, where we've got our younger students in primary school are learning how to interact as humans with each other, and then as our students get older at secondary school, they're working through their own sense of building their identity, and then later doing that through video conferences and a completely new way of interacting is genuinely really challenging. And I think through this, I can't speak highly enough of our students and the staff and families that have been supporting them through that.
All right, thank you. And thank you too for your long-standing and great support of Into Science over many years. You've been fantastic for us. Corey, maybe if I could just go to you. You're obviously, just as I was reading your CV before, you're passionate about science, and I think the audience, I'm interested, and I'm sure the audience will be interested, just what sparked your interest in science, that sort of fundamental question, and how does that help how you, I suppose, inform how you interact with schools today?
Well, firstly, I want to say Yama, everyone, and that's Kamilaroi for hello. It's really interesting. So I grew up I had a bit of a rough childhood, and I moved around a lot, and I was always the kid that was picking up creepy crawlies, whether it be snakes, lizards, spiders. And, I was always asking the questions like, why does a blue tongue have a blue tongue? Or like, why does it have a partial eye which allows it to see in colour? It was these kind of questions that drove me. The first book I read was a reptile book because I was picking up blue tongue lizards. And I guess during COVID and how I engage with children and kids around the country is the same sort of questions. Decolonizing science, for one, our people are the first scientists of this land, and, changing the narrative that we often push Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids towards sport and art, but they come from generations of scientists that have over 65,000 years of knowledge. Just sort of engaging kids that way, making it relatable.
Thanks. And so while we've got you, why does a blue tongue have a blue tongue?
Well, one, they're the ultimate creature of bluff. Most venomous things in Australia and around the world are blue. So the best way to pretend that you're scary is to pretend that you're venomous. And what they can do as well, they can almost double their size by inhaling oxygen.
Does that mean I shouldn't have a blue coat on?
No, because everyone will think you're venomous, John.
That's right. I'm worried about. Now, I want to go to sort of a fundamental question, and it really goes to Lisa's presentation, and that slide there again, the pipeline slide, with I think it had 10% of engineers, only 10% of women. I think the latest report from the chief scientist says it might be up to 15% of the total workforce, but it's going to be in that 10 to 15% range. So this fundamental question of just how we increase female participation in engineering, and it wasn't just engineering, I think computing, Lisa, you said it was 19%. And can I overlay it, because Lisa, you mentioned cultural issues, that other countries around the world don't necessarily have those percentages. And I'm thinking about COVID and the dramatic changes that that's making. And I'm thinking BCG Group put out a great paper recently, and they said that, you know, every crisis around the world produces a major change. So you think of S11, it was really security, and particularly aviation security. It became the fastest growing industry in the world. You think of the Second World War, and I guess this is the point of the question, it was women in the workforce. There were hardly any women in the workforce. It was the Second World War. It was a crisis. It opened up employment to women. And I'm wondering, you know, with COVID, online transformation, more people working from home, a lot more people working from home, do you think those things might lead to more women being able or wanting to take up engineering or computing? And just how generally do you think we can, what initiatives can we take to tackle this issue?
Yeah, well, there's a few parts to that question. What interesting is you mentioned. Yeah, that's all right. Interesting you mentioned the Second World War, because obviously the men generally went off to the continent and fought, and you know, I'm talking from a UK perspective here, but the women would work in munitions factories, firefighting industry, all those things. Yeah. One of the interesting things, the soccer even, women started playing football, and you know, you get 100,000 spectators in Wembley Stadium watching women's football. That went backwards as soon as the war ended, and that's a real lesson. And we didn't get large crowds in women's soccer in the UK until a couple of years ago. You know, so we're talking about a 75-year time span. So that's really the lesson there. You can't be complacent, and change doesn't happen unless you make a deliberate plan. And that's why we created the Women in STEM Decadal Plan, the 10-year plan for increasing participation, because it's got very specific research and evidence-based points which tell us the types of interventions that will make a difference. So the types of real snag points that that prevent girls from going into STEM careers. You've got the young pinch point. So girls aged less than 6 start developing attitudes from the things, the cues, the social cues that we give them as parents, as educators, as society generally, that there are male jobs and female jobs. And, you know, we see a female airline pilot, we're still slightly surprised, if we're honest. Or a bus driver. You know, there are just those things, those associations that we make. And the second pinch point is when women get into STEM careers. We have the fact that women do far more childcare. Women, of course, give birth to children, and that is the cause of a huge number of women to drop out of STEM careers, because it's not the cause of it. The cause of it is the fact that the system doesn't actually accommodate those changes needed temporarily in women's participation in the workforce, and then doesn't actively encourage or facilitate them returning. We have other things like, you know, the gender pay gap, but they're all really symptomatic of the fact that we've designed a system over hundreds of years for essentially the model of the married male worker, and we haven't dismantled that system in a really conscious way. And we need to take this opportunity to do that dismantling and reassemble a system that works for everyone, to enable men to look after their children, to take a full and rewarding part in their children's lives and upbringing, and to enable women to also have that choice and not to financially tip the balance either way.
Okay. I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but Bronwyn, your thoughts on this? You're on mute, Bronwyn.
No, that would be because, yes, the old microphone up at the head is the problem. So you're right. This is something that we have to tackle very consciously. Now, I've had a long engineering career in construction in a whole range of areas, and you just see how exciting it is to be an engineer. And you look at every 6-year-old and they're a budding engineer. They're getting their Lego out. They're playing. So you sort of ask the question, why doesn't everyone want to be an engineer? And we know that isn't the case. So it is role models. It's showing the possibility. It's helping parents and the school teachers when their kid says, I'm interested in anything, whether it's the blue tongue of a lizard or how does my Lego tower get bigger and bigger, and saying science or engineering is for you. So Lisa's absolutely right. Let's capture this moment now and build on it, which if you look at the Nordic countries after World War I, when their only resource, they had to get everyone working, they said structurally, what do we have to do? We have to have childcare. We have to have expectations that men will be part of this as well. And it's fascinating, but in Denmark, 51% of their engineers are women. And I reckon it's because the Lego factory is in Denmark. That's my unsubstantiated guess.
Can I just follow up with you, both of you? Again, thinking through COVID and the two big things that I think, the online transformation. And interestingly, in my role as Chancellor at La Trobe University, we've just completed survey work of our students who've spent the last semester being educated online. And we didn't know whether they would say it was a positive experience or a negative experience. In fact, it's been overwhelmingly positive. It's quite interesting. And with a couple of my other hats on, chairing Citywide and another company, we've had a lot of people working from home. And again, the survey, men and women, of course, the survey results coming back has been overwhelmingly positive about those changed arrangements. So I'm just wondering if you put those two things together with a science overlay, so more flexible working arrangements, more ability to work from home, and I'm certainly absolutely not saying women should be working from home, but that flexibility in the arrangements and the online transformation and revolution, and what we do now, which was inconceivable 5 or 10 years ago, do you think that's going to open up more flexibility in working arrangements? And I think that was one of the points on your slide, Lisa. In the mid-range there, that's one of the issues, flexible working arrangements.
Yeah.
Just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to always frame this, as you have done, in terms of flexibility for all and not split expectations. So, sometimes people fall into the trap of saying women need flexible working, which, women need men to take equal responsibility for childcare and unpaid domestic labour. Women do more than twice the amount of unpaid domestic work as men, and these are women with PhDs in scientific and technical subjects that have been surveyed by the ABS through the census and just been published in the Chief Scientist report. So highly qualified women are still doing far more than their fair share of unpaid labour, and we need to shift that and then the flexibility for all to be normalised, so we don't go back to the ridiculous situation where millions upon millions of people are travelling across major cities all at the same time, creating massive traffic chaos, wasting their lives sitting in cars, creating pollution, and not fulfilling their family lives. And really, for me, flexibility is, it's all about that. Just a very quick point. I was home educated from the age of 11 to the age of 16. I taught myself, so I didn't attend school during that whole time. I've always been an advocate of, flexible and self-directed learning and the freedom to do that. And that was only possible because my dad was the person who stayed at home and my mum went out to work and she ran a primary school. So, it does sometimes take one parent to take time off, but that doesn't have to be a woman.
Yep, absolutely. Bronwyn, anything more you want to add on that one?
I think that point about normalising flexibility is essential. Plus, at the moment, I'm running CEO roundtables talking to leaders, men and women across our sector. And what they're saying is this ability to give 90 minutes for a 90-minute meeting rather than giving a day and a half for a 90-minute meeting means they can engage more, not just externally, but with their staff. And what they quite like is they're humanising themselves to their staff. So when the cat runs across their knee or their kid starts to want to show you their book on dinosaurs, which I had a couple of weeks ago, you start to see that people are much more than the suit they're wearing and the role they have. So it shows that being an engineer, being a leader is something that very human people have to do. So I think this opportunity is something that we can embrace and continue to make an important contribution to changing our profession.
Thank you. Just a question to all the panellists, just to change tack just a little bit. I've been chair of InterScience now for a number of years, and the work we do, I think, is really important again in that early stage and helping students and changing perceptions and getting them excited in science. We've got a number of industry partners, but we'd love more, and I think more generally, how do we get more partnerships between schools and industry that really encourage, promote, stimulate young people to be thinking about the huge opportunities in science? So I just want to open that up to each of the panellists. We're seeing some good partnerships, and we have some great partners at InterScience, but we'd love to see more in the future. So just open that up. Maybe Kath or Corey, do you want to start on that one?
I'm happy to start on that. I think, the best thing about, with Deadly Science, for example, we've got a partnership with 106 remote schools. And I think the best part about building partnerships is sort of taking perspectives from each community, because each community is different, right? So no matter where you go in Australia, each community, even in the city, even non-Indigenous communities, are going to have their own little quirks and their own skill set and their own knowledges that they can bring to the table. And I guess for engaging kids and partners, you just got to make science accessible, because the notion of you can't be what you can't see is so real. And, just hearing Bronwyn speak and Lisa speak, it's so evident that, not only do we need strong women that are role models in STEM, but also we need Indigenous role models, and we need, we need more role models of diverse backgrounds, so we can say, okay, this is the way to go. And, so kids can not only just look up to that AFL player, they can look up to that awesome astrophysicist that, and it's about creating the connection. And everyone has value. Thank you.
Kath?
I think I'd just add to that. I think it's really interesting to ask this question, particularly at this time during COVID, where so much of the rhetoric is about well-being and how we look after ourselves and how we look after each other. And when we delve into what it means to have well-being, one thing that comes through really strongly is a sense of meaning and purpose with what we're doing. And I think when young people are exposed to the meaning and purpose behind the work that STEM professionals do, and they can see that that work has an impact on the world around them, it can have an impact on them, that will engage them in the long term. And I think sometimes we opt to show kids things that bang and fizz and kind of have that instantaneous kind of reaction when all the kids just want to blow up something in science. But actually, when we do that deeper work and help them connect that to that greater sense of being part of something that's bigger than ourselves, I think that's quite powerful.
Yeah, can I just before we go to the other two panelists on that, just follow up with you on that. So when Lisa was speaking earlier, right at the start, she said, it's about more women in STEM is about two things. It's about breaking down the barriers, and also, Kath, as you've just said, focusing on the positives, the social good, the change, the solving the world's problems, improving the environment. Just for your students at Melton, so you've got a pretty diverse population there. Do those sort of bigger aspirations, are they cutting through with your students, or is it more just about getting a job at the end of the day?
Oh, I think those big aspirations cut through all walks of life and demographics, and I think the reality is that our young people do have dreams and aspirations, and I think whether or not they see those role models around them, there is a sense of intrinsic drive that many young people do have, where they do want to, I suppose, seek that connection and contribution to the world. So yes, I think that's absolutely true for our students at Melton, and I know that that's to be true in the other contexts that our other panellists will be working at as well.
No, good. No, I'm pleased to hear that. I'm a big believer in the power of that thinking, how you can make a difference, how you can make a change. So no, thank you for that. Bronwyn, Lisa, your thoughts on stronger partnerships, education and industry?
I'll just jump in there to give an example where we partnered recently in the virtual world. Every year in Sydney in particular, we run, and across all the country, a winter summer school. No, you can't have a winter summer school. A winter engineering school for kids. When we do it face-to-face, we get about 100 kids. We take them for a week across Sydney and visit universities and companies. This year we were forced to go online. We went from 100 to 700. We still got the same level of engagement. In fact, we had in each of our sessions that ran across the week, on average, 500 people signing up. And what I particularly like, it wasn't the same 30 schools we always went to. We got out to nearly 200 schools, and about, I'm just looking at my statistics here, close to 30% of those schools were regional, and 47% of the participants were young women. Normally it's 30%. So we were not just getting a much bigger reach, we were democratising that access. And we were showing them companies like Cochlear, and I worked there at Cochlear for a while. It is amazing, the transformation of engineering. We took them to Dolby virtually. We took them to the Field Robotics Centre. So we were showing them engineering really goes across all areas. So we were doing that partnership with universities, partnership with industry, and then going out to the schools. And we now see this as a model we want to continue with, even when we also do face-to-face programs. So it is a great way to showcase engineering by using engineering to get out to those students, which is exactly what we're doing now. So we've learned that we can be much more impactful, get much greater reach, and get to kids we wouldn't otherwise get to. So it's actually really exciting, while understanding that for many it's also extraordinarily challenging.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Lisa, is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, that's incredibly exciting. I've seen many programs, a few programs like that have worked incredibly well. The STEM Industry Schools Partnerships in New South Wales are a really great example of that, and they have spread from just a few schools around the Hunter Valley region now to the entire state, and that's a fantastic model. And the real strength of that is that the expectations of the industry partner and the schools and the school hubs are made very clear from the start. And you have younger students in primary schools connected with high school students who are then visiting industry and really undertaking very detailed projects. Linking back to what I said in my talk, trying to solve real world problems, and what Bronwyn just said about Cochlear, such an amazing, inspiring company that helps to demonstrably improve lives. And there's really no one who wouldn't want to work in something like that. And so research shows very strongly, if you talk about engineering in terms of building bridges, measuring angles, smashing things, girls are far less interested than if you actually talk about the social benefits and the collaborative working and the creativity and those wonderful aspects that are also equally true. The Queensland University of Technology a few years ago renamed some of their engineering degrees, kept the content identical, and more students who are young women signed up immediately. So it's all about branding. So really engineering is one of those key areas where we have to help people understand how it helps the world. And teachers have a great role in that.
All right, fantastic. Now we're going to go to Slido in a moment. I'm just having a look through all the questions that have come through. Boy, there's a lot of questions. We're going to be here pretty late tonight, so settle in. No, we're not. We're going to finish on time. But one question generally, Lisa, you mentioned Cochlear. So it's interesting, actually. Think about Cochlear, think about CSL. Both companies, both very successful Australian companies, both international, both deeply based on science, research and development and innovation. But both of them started in different ways with a lot of government support. CSL, of course, was a government company and privatised, and Cochlear started with major support through Medical Research Institute funding. So we're coming out of COVID. It's the biggest recession, actually depression, since the First World War. The federal government and state governments are looking at what they can do to stimulate economic recovery. What are some of the ideas you might have that governments could do to stimulate support for more jobs and more opportunities in science, research and development and innovation? Because this is what they're very focused on at the moment. A lot of money for VET, but we haven't seen a lot of money yet for research and development or science and innovation. Are there any ideas, sorry, it's very much a question without notice, but that come to mind that government could or should be doing?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things is ensuring that all kids in Australia, no matter what your background, where you come from, where you live in Australia, has access to the resources that are going to engage kids in STEM. And I think that, the jobs of the future, whether it be quantum computing and physics and, coding, and these are the jobs that are going to exist. So really, we need to be investing in the younger ones, teaching them coding and making sure that every kid in Australia has access to these educational resources, not just the ones that can afford it.
Thank you. Kath?
Yeah, look, I think there's been some great points that have already been made. I echo what Corey's just said. Resourcing and thinking about ways that we can continue to include groups of people who don't otherwise have as much access to our universities and to our world-class science training and continuing to promote those kind of pathways.
Thanks. And Bronwyn.
Yeah, to tackle your question about what might be some of the areas the government looks at, we've got growth centres right now that are focused on things like advanced manufacturing, medtech, agri-tech, looking at some of the mining and equipment, and I think Lisa mentioned that as well. We've got real capability in Australia about in some of those areas, and we know if we look at, say, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that it's important to transform those industries into ones that are making a positive difference while still creating and taking that innovation and commercialising it. So sometimes it isn't necessarily putting in place new things, it's making sure the ones that are there are working well and continue to be supported. And some of the other programs that the government supports are our cooperative research centres, which takes industry groups like Engineers Australia and academics, and starts to really develop an important sector like digital twins in the built environment, so we can understand it better and build safer and save costs. So there's some really interesting areas that I think Australia has a real competitive advantage at, and all of them take engineers. So everyone on the line, start thinking about your engineering career from now. So this is an exciting time, in addition to some of the stimulus package, to really help our economy once we continue to go through this difficult period.
Okay, thank you. I know we're struggling a little bit with broadband in and out a bit there, but it's often the way we sort of peak hour at 5 o'clock at night. We've got some fabulous questions on Slido. I'm going to start with one, which is ranking at the top of the list. And Corey, it's probably to you, but to other panellists as well, whoever wants to join in. The question is, how can we leverage the long and deep connection that Australia's Indigenous communities have with the land and the scientific understanding of climate, agriculture, astronomy and much more to excite young Indigenous students about STEM?
This is a very complicated answer, but it's also a very simple one. And we need to change the narrative. So, if we were teaching our kids that we come from the country that invented bread, the world's first fish traps, we were the first astronomers, we were the first people to look at the stars and predict seasonal calendars, this is really cool stuff. And whether you come from, if you come from the Americas, you come from the you come from Europe, or you come from Africa, every single continent in Australia, or in the world, sorry, I'm slipping up, but has a unique history with science. And Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people are no different. If you want to include more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids, include them in the conversation. Get to know our history. And you know what? It might be my people's history, but just by being born in Australia and living here, it's your history too, and own it.
Thanks, Corey. Great answer. Anyone else want to comment on that? No? We'll go to second question, again, a very popular question. We're lacking teachers with strong STEM backgrounds. And it's one of the reasons we've got into science, to try and mentor and encourage more students in science. So the question is, how do you encourage someone with a PhD in engineering to consider teaching when the money is often much better in industry? So this is a problem. Kath, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's a very real problem that question has raised, and I think it's about our having another look at the way that different professions are valued in society through their pay, and we want to attract those people who do have vast experiences in STEM fields and who are career changers into the teaching profession, not just as a second option, but as a first option, that they see that as a pathway that's really valuable. And I think the meaning and purpose piece is important behind that, and I think that that's important for people coming into teaching to see the purpose behind it. But the reality is that there are also some really concrete things like the pay that people might be changing from, and we need to think about ways to make that more attractive so that we can keep attracting great people into our profession.
I think that's true. Absolutely true. Any other comments on that question? Bronwyn?
Look, I think we spoke earlier about the problem of role models for people to want to be engineers. I think as an engineer, it would be great for us to see role models of teachers who've similarly gone from engineering to teaching, and it may be because you will learn from kids. They ask the best questions and you think, well, that's got me thinking. So as an engineer, as one of the sort of phases in your career, I think it would be a great opportunity to have that chance to go from industry into teaching and back into industry or something like that. But I think we also need to see the role models of people who've done that as teachers. And I think then we'll start to see more. And you're right, changing the remuneration is essential. We need to demonstrate we value teachers. But I guess the other point is not every engineer is hugely remunerated. But we should absolutely be paying teachers more and appropriately.
Okay. Thank you. So another question, how can we best overcome the socio-economic gap in relation to online learning and remote learning, internet connections and adequate technological resources and support are vital for learning online? How can we make this accessible to all? Well, Lisa.
Well, I would say the mega constellations are going up. So the satellites currently being launched by SpaceX and other companies are going to create the capability, at least theoretical capability, for very good internet connectivity anywhere. So in the next 5 years, this won't be a problem. It will just simply be a monetary problem. So the problem will not be broadband dug in fibre optic cables underground anymore. All it takes is the political will and a decision from government to enable that connectivity to happen, and it will. So I think that problem will kind of dissipate slightly. But for the short term, from what I've read, some state and territory education departments are paying for equipment and connections for young people, but in some and also charities like the Smith family, creating those possibilities for some people. But it's so hit and miss that the access to within homes, the access to these resources is very, very variable. And I struggle in some cases to see a short-term fix for that. I'd love to hear if anyone else, has a solution.
I guess it's a money question. Largely, I think you're right. I mean, the technology is so rapidly developing in different forms, in different ways. But it's a money question. A lot of it is a money question, but not entirely, is it, Corey? I suppose there's many Indigenous communities or remote communities that still have poor access.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna sort of change the way that we sort of think of science in a way with this statement. But science equals hope, and whether you're doing engineering or chemistry or whatever form of science you're doing, you are trying to solve a problem to make people's lives better, right? So in this case, like, we're always going to have, we're not going to change the socio-economic landscape overnight, but what we can do is actually build connections so that young kids will have the skills to access these resources. And at the moment, in a lot of Aboriginal communities and remote communities, simply these resources do not exist. And unless someone puts those resources there, we really don't get anywhere. So I think with the, just today I've done 2 Skype sessions with remote schools, and we've talked about all different sorts of things from electrons to weird and wacky animals. But, without the internet being there and that technology being there, that Skype session doesn't happen. So I think, it is a monetary issue, but also we need people to get out there and give hope to these communities, because science equals hope and education is freedom.
Yep. Beautifully put. While I've got you, I'll put you on the spot. One of the other questions that came in here from Slido is, because you said you've been on Skype twice today, when you're online, are there any sort of tricks you've learnt to keep kids excited, stimulated, as they might be in a face-to-face class?
Oh yeah, there's plenty of tricks, and when you work with remote communities all the time, you cop a little bit as well, which is nice. But I guess the stuff that I sort of teach and Deadly Science brings to these remote schools is that anyone could be a scientist, no matter who you are. If you've asked why the sky is blue and the grass is green, that is a science question. If you want to, if you have a question, then there's nothing that's off limits. And often with Aboriginal kids and Torres Strait Islander kids, they become really shy because, they're not encouraged to ask questions. Every single image they see of an Aboriginal kid on television is something that is really negative. And so something that my organisation's been doing lately is we've been doing videos of science facts. So how's honey made? How does a bee make honey? And then we're sending that to another school. So it is an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander student teaching another Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander student how honey works. Or it's me or it's someone else, but it's that investment in people. Because at the end of the day, we have all this wonderful brain power and technology, but there's something that's not going to change, and that's the fact that we're human.
Thank you. Any other comments on that one? No? I'm going to go to another, if Alison will let me, if we've got time. Here's a question. What do we think are some of the long-term effects that COVID-19 might have on students? Are there any key learnings we can put in place? I don't know. Kath, do you want to have a crack at that? I don't want to put you on the spot, but...
Yeah, sure. Look, I think it's really interesting, and there's clearly some really acute short-term impacts at the moment that we've touched on in terms of connectivity and accessibility to the internet. I think long-term, it's going to be interesting to look at how essentially forcing a whole lot of technology to be used through teaching and learning does impact where we've got to, because I think in a lot of ways some of our most disadvantaged schools have been forced to use a huge amount of technology that they might not have otherwise got to. So I'm really curious to understand about the long-term effects and whether I think what's likely is that actually what we've got in our classrooms now is a lot more technology than would have been used by schools serving our most disadvantaged communities. So I think that's a really interesting aspect to watch and follow. And I suppose, I think that there are a couple of other aspects there that I could touch on, but I'll see if anyone else wants to contribute.
Just a very quick follow-up. Have you done, at Melton, have you done surveys of the students and parents about their attitudes while they've been learning from home, whether they're sort of good, neutral, bad, extremely good?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we keep a pretty close eye on in connecting with our community, and we've been able to be really responsive to what students and families are saying from the first lockdown essentially to the second, a lot of remote learning now. And one thing that's come through really strongly is still the value of that face-to-face connection with students and teachers, and so that's made us look at how we use our video conferencing platforms more and differently as an example of one of those things.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to comment on that question?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I just want...
Corey, you go, and then Bronwyn.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Bronwyn. I guess, just to add on that, the real positive about technology being rolled out to more students and communities. But I guess the other thing that we've got to be a bit mindful of is that in remote schools, we have a lot of teachers that come from Sydney, Melbourne, and now because of COVID, they are separated from their families and their friends. And, we just need to be mindful of our remote teachers who do such a wonderful job. Their service often gets ignored because they leave their state or sometimes their city and they spend months and months and months away, and they use the school holidays to return. And some of the stuff that we're seeing at the moment is, because of the COVID and the situation being so fluid, a lot of remote teachers aren't returning to communities. So in a way, it does benefit children, but it will be a negative effect as well. And just from speaking with remote schools and working in them regularly, the students build relationships with their teachers. And when they leave, it's a restart. So although there's a lot of benefits, there also is quite a few negative things that are going to come out of it. And, we're stronger together as well. So that's really it.
Thanks, Corey. Bronwyn.
I just wanted to also reflect on what I'm hearing when I speak to people in industry. They talk about this as being the largest, fastest experiment we've had to go remote. And I think everyone, and I'm sure it is for schools, I think the jury's out about what the impact will be long term. Some companies, some industries are saying, we think this is great, we might continue with this way of working. And I suspect for schools that they're sort of thinking, what will it mean for us as well? But it's like we had to just change so quickly. It's hard to have the full evaluation systems in place to say, so what and so what next?
Yeah, and I think that's true. I've got another Slido question, which is raised to the top. It's very popular. I don't know who wants to answer this because we haven't got anyone here from government, but the question, at school, I never hear anyone talking about engineering, and the curriculum and teachers really don't encourage this pathway. Has the government considered reviewing school curriculums to include more STEM awareness from a young age?
I was involved recently on a group called the Engineering Task Force for Australia, and we commissioned a piece of work from Monash University, a report on how to engage, exactly this question, how to engage young people in engineering and increase the number of people in the pipeline to engineering. So it's such an important one. Australia doesn't generate enough engineers. We import more than half of our engineers from other countries. Next couple of years, we're not going to be importing anyone. So our skills shortage in engineering is going to get even worse. So we really, really need to focus on this area. Some of the findings were, or the recommendations were that we need to create an engineering identity in schools. And what that means is most people, kids, parents, teachers, don't know what engineers do. They just think of someone in a hard hat, maybe, overseeing the construction of a bridge or something. You just conjure up this very stereotypical, narrow view. So Engineers Australia, I think, are doing a really good job in trying to promote what engineering is. But, that's a small organisation. It needs to be done through the curriculum. There is currently a national curriculum review being undertaken. There is all the teachers and educators online will know there is a huge pressure on the curriculum. Keep shoving more things into it is probably not the right way to go. But I think every single educator, every parent, everyone involved in educating young people has a responsibility to get those resources like the Careers with STEM magazines into the schools, to read up on modern engineering concepts and the types of jobs that people can go into, the vet pathways into engineering and the university pathways, and to really, encourage young people to take those pathways and create projects. A lot of projects that are called science in school are actually engineering, so name it. That's the first step.
Bronwyn.
So just to really reiterate Lisa's point, and thank you, you're absolutely right. At Engineers Australia, we are working hard because the next generation of engineers, and you're right, we need to be really boosting our domestic engineering students. But there is a wonderful resource. So every single teacher, parent and student online tonight, check out Star Portal, which is a project that Engineers Australia did with the Australian Chief Scientist that has fantastic resources on there. Plus, at Engineers Australia, we have divisions across Australia full of engineers who would love to help you, come and talk to you, work on programs. So we are a resource you can use We are the peak body of the profession. We've got young engineers, grad students. We've got people in mid-career, senior careers. We have an Indigenous engineering group. We've got an LGBTQI community of engineers. We're not as diverse as we'd like to be, clearly, but we're getting there. So check out our resources. And I think there's a question here or a comment here from one of the participants who says, I think teachers forget to reach out. So please, my plea to you online is contact us. There is stuff available.
All right, thanks. Before I go to Kath, are we facing a shortage of engineers?
Not at the moment. We have a pipeline, and if we go to infrastructure, there's some very clear pipeline issues. When those infrastructure projects come online, we are not going to have enough engineers, and it's going to be exacerbated by the fact that those half of our population of engineers, as Lisa rightly said, come from overseas trained engineers. When we can't bring them into Australia, and that's likely to last at least the next 12 months, if not longer, we have a serious problem, and we are working with the deans of engineering and talking to the government around what that might mean. Right now, we don't have a shortage of engineers, but it could well become so. So again, if you're looking for career choices, young people online, think about your engineering degrees or technologists or associates. So lots of opportunities.
So just very quickly, it's a fascinating area, and a lot of our engineers, as the panel has said, positions have been filled by skilled migrants and their migration program. And I heard Alan Tudge, the federal minister, speak briefly about this, and just saying how dramatic the reduction in Australia's population growth rate is going to be because we'll have much lower levels of migration. So this is quite an issue, but potentially a great opportunity to get more women into science and more women into engineering. The number of places at universities is capped, as you know, and while there's some stability of funding that's been provided by the federal government, there's not really growth there. So this is going to be an area where, in the absence of policy change, universities and industry and schools and Engineers Australia are going to have to work and look at how we can create more positions and more scholarships. I'm a big believer in scholarships. I've seen what they do at La Trobe University, where students who otherwise wouldn't get an opportunity can go on and become an engineer or a scientist. So it's going to be a big challenge for us. And ditto, Kath, in teaching, we're going to be short of some teachers as well. It's an interesting challenge for Australia. Have to pay them more, eh? All right. Now, I'm very conscious, Alison, have we got time for one more, or are we going to wrap up?
I think we've got time for one more, John. How can we accommodate the language barriers of different cultural backgrounds to ensure family and kids get to know more about STEM? That's an interesting question. If you think of the whole COVID debate at the moment, one of the challenges there has been communicating to different communities. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's an interesting one. The recent report from the chief scientist that I authored an article in the conversation with the chief scientist last week about that. You can have a look at that. But it did note some particular sort of interesting facts and statistics around STEM and the STEM workforce in Australia. And more than 50% of women who work in STEM in Australia actually speak a language other than English at home. Oh. So it's a really big cohort. And it's also noted along a similar line that the unemployment rate for recent arrivals from countries other than Australia had a higher unemployment rate than those who had the same qualifications who were born in Australia. So some very sort of stark reminders there that there is this huge pool of opportunity for people with skills. And really, I think in Australia we do have this idea, although there are literally hundreds of languages native to Australia, that English is really the only one considered quite often. So I don't have the answer to your question, unfortunately, but I think it's something that I've noticed in Australia is not really well considered.
Mm-hmm. Very thoughtful answer. Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that one?
Yeah, I might comment. So in Australia, we have 28 different Aboriginal languages that are spoken regularly, and kids are bilingual, and sometimes English is their third or fourth language. And but we are really lucky, and in the sense of our culture hasn't really been lost. We've got language centres around Australia, especially in Meningreta in the NT, where these could be resources that we can use in STEM to put resources into language. And it's again, our culture is really beautiful, and so is our people. And if we look at New Zealand and how they celebrate Maori culture, it'd be so great to see some more STEM resources being put into languages. And then again, once again, connecting it back. Make it relatable. If a book's in language, then it's more likely to be read in community than it's in English, and that makes sense. Yeah, you wouldn't go to Paris and hand someone an English book and go, oh, you know what, this is that. You would want it in French.
Absolutely. All right, listen, I'm going to wind up there. It being 4 minutes to 6. I know Alison's going to do all the thank yous, but I just do want to thank our panel. I thought a fabulous panel session and some really excellent answers, and thank you to everybody who sent the questions in. And one quick advertisement, I know Alison will give another one, but Into Science, our advisory board, the members are here today. Alison, is, of course, is our CEO. But it's a fabulous organisation. We do great work, but we'd love to do much more. And we get, like so many things, we get limited funding from government. But for anyone from industry listening tonight, we're always open to partnerships, to do more, to excite, to stimulate, to encourage more young people from all communities to take up science, because that, as you've heard tonight, is what our country, what our nation needs to solve the big problems we face. So with that, Alison, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, John. I just want to reiterate what you've said. It was a really exciting discussion, and those of us in Victoria, we're facing some pretty significant challenges, and it was a bit of a hard day today, and it was really great to end the day with a really interesting and inspiring discussion. And I know there's been a lot of discussion on the Q&A channel for WebEx as well, for the WebEx event platform. So I thank you for your contributions, everyone who's submitted a question or commented in that Q&A channel. It's really greatly appreciated, and we're really pleased that everyone found this event so useful. I'll just finish up by saying that we will provide links to the resources and websites that were mentioned today. For those of you who are in Victoria, I would invite you to join the VicSTEM Alliance, which is a project spearheaded by Victoria's lead science, Dr. Amanda Caples. And so with that, I'm declaring this event is now finished. Thank you once again to the panellists, to John for your great moderation, and Lisa especially for your really excellent keynote. So thank you, and take care and stay safe, everyone. Thanks.